So the system of redesign is a really important part of this process. And before we do that, we have to understand the system. And so I've explored that extensively, both reading and research, etc., to understand, like Bessel van der Kolk has both The Body Keeps the Score, but he's also collaborated with several other psychologists to understand data around abuse, and it's more of a manual for other psychologists. You get to learn a lot of statistical data in that book. I forget the name of the book, but I think it's one of any book that Bessel van der Kolk has co-written or written is top-notch. Gabor Mate's work is top-notch. Alice Miller's work is top-notch. If you're a man, I found great inspiration in Robert Bly, both in his work with Iron John, in a lot of his different lectures with New Dimensions, available on Audible. So it's understand the system. Understand the system and learn. Go through the terrain and understand, this bit, look for the pattern. The pattern is the feminine expression of something. The data point is the masculine. You see, in a chauvinistic culture, you get one data point from the individual. What do you want? What happened here? When you're looking at the same information through the feminine lens, you don't look at the individual. You say, in a group of 1,000 Americans, how many are raped in a given year? Okay, thank you. How many are emotionally humiliated once a month or more? Okay. How many of the domestic relationships have domestic violence? 30%, okay. And 18% of you have substance addictions. Do any of you know what the core problems are? Okay, no. Okay, ignorance about trauma and this. How many of you understand how to recognize trauma in 1,000 Americans? 3%. And how many of the 3% know what to do about it? 20%. And do you all agree on that, or you're in chaos about that? I see. Okay, so we've got chaos in the response, and a very small minority know what to do. Then how many of you think it's your responsibility if any of these people get sexually abused or hurt and know what to do about it? How many people would do anything about it? So you all think it's their problem and you don't know it's your problem. I see. Okay, so we have a good sense of the system here. Thank you. We now know statistically significant numbers out of 1,000 random Americans, what's going on. And it has nothing to do with the individuals. When Vegas sets the table that 70% of all bets will go to the house, and you go into Vegas and you place 100 bets, it doesn't have a lot to do with you. It has a lot to do with Vegas. So you have to understand the system before you understand is that system your friend. So if you think that a system where 70% of the bets go to the house is your friend, you will go and take your mortgage payment and your $100,000 or whatever, and you will place 100 bets in Vegas, and 99% of you will walk away with less money. Now, if you thought that was good for you, that you have no money, you will recommend that to your friend. Go on. Life's a bitch, but you got to play the game. Bet your money on the house. Now, this is not about the individual. You look at the pattern. Statistically significant numbers. And if 1/3 of Americans that are living together participate in domestic violence, and you should know that the history in the United States is that all abuses are suppressed and minimized. That's what our cult does. A few decades ago, it was estimated that 1 in 4 million women were incest survivors. And in a little comment about that, it was further pointed out that women whose father fucked them when they were children were better prepared for marriage, and so it was probably a good thing. Does that sound like a shadow denial cult to you, or does that sound like, wow, we really want to get to the bottom of the feminine wound here in a chauvinistic cult? quite remarkable that I've met so many female sexual abuse survivors at high and among my clients. Quite remarkable. 1 in 4 million women survivors of incest. I've met probably 200 people in the last year. I've only asked 4, and 1 out of the 4 that I asked was an incest survivor. A little strange odds there. And so you got to understand the system and the statistical thing that you're dealing with before you can really participate in redesigning the data. And that's why I find it significant. For example, in my last email to the team, where I was challenging them, come on, wake up, no one's dealing here. You call yourselves committed to a world where everyone wins. Your facilitator sexually abused me. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Well, 1 of the 30 was indignant that I was kind of poking at her a bit. And she said, Dane, I remember you. And I was sexually abused at high while on team, and I have PTSD from it, and I've been dealing with it for 10 years. Why don't you move on? Because you're not going to get any resolution with high. And I said to myself, okay, so a lot of silence and collusion in secrecy among the team, but 1 in 30 who's no longer a team member has PTSD and has been dealing for 2 years, for 10 years. And she didn't tell and confront the facilitators about it. Well, how many team members have there been in the 40 years of high? If 1 in 30 of them have been sexually abused and didn't confront the facilitators, and they're all going away and keeping secret, maybe that's part of the system of collusion and allowing this to continue. Seems like I've got to do something different than she's doing, because if she had done her job to tell all of her participants that she had PTSD and that's why she was leaving high, I would have known what PTSD was before I caught it. And I would have known there's something fishy going on in this room of love. And high might have had to start the change process a little sooner than the dragging its feet until now. You got to know the data. Now, there's another thing that I want to say around knowing the data. One of the things that I learned, for example, in this process is, 5% of Catholic priests molest their children repeatedly, the children in their parish. Well, that's what's known, because the Catholic Church in the Vatican keeps track of those statistics, whereas most schools don't. Now, the reason they know that is because the priests who molest their children then get rotated to another parish where nobody knows that they're a pedophile. And then they molest those children. And so the Vatican can keep track of the 5%. But then the question becomes, okay, so the Vatican is colluding to rotate 5% of its priests who sexually molested children. What's the therapeutic statistic? So a therapist is in a similar power dynamic as a priest. They're not pretending to be God, thank heavens, but they are saying they love you and blah, 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 and you're telling them your sexual fantasies and all that. So what percentage of therapists have sex with their patients? And what percentage of those turn out well for the patient? Now, when I write to therapists about sexual abuse, I get complete and utter silence. Now, this is interesting, because if I wrote to architects about architectural abuse, there would be a great deal of interest. If I asked architects to be in a documentary, there'd be interest. If I asked chefs, If I said, I'm making a documentary about the best cooking practices in the world and some of the worst cooking practices. You all say you love cooking. You like to be in a documentary about that? Me. Italians want to, Indians want to, Jamaicans want to. Oh, we want to be on a documentary to talk about our craft. Therapists, not so much. I wrote to Elaine Aron, the author of The Highly Sensitive Person. I said, I am a highly sensitive person who has been sexually abused with my therapist. And I'd like to talk with you in a documentary about this terrain. She was way too busy to consider such an interview. So I said, okay, you're too busy to talk about something you haven't talked about in any of your books. Now, you are a psychologist who has been talking with highly sensitive people in a sexually abusive, rampant culture. This is a culture filled with sexual abuse. I've had sex with 35, 40 American women, and more than 30% of them have experienced severe sexual abuse. Some of them have been incest survivors. So you're their psychologist. You're seeing this as a big deal for women and men, and it's a bigger deal for sensitives, okay? Where's the chapter about sexual abuse and repairing in your books, Elaine Aron? Where? She doesn't want to talk about it. I said, fine. You have a network of highly sensitive therapists, right? That you're referring to your clients. Why don't you ask them to participate in the documentary? No, she doesn't want to do that. So I write to every single one of them. This is the terrain. This is the purpose of the documentary, to help highly sensitive people who have been sexually abused. Will you participate? Zip. I write back to Elaine Aron. She won't deal with me directly, of course, because we can't have that, but her secretary who will talk back and forth. So I say, I see a problem here. Not one of your therapists is at all interested in any way in talking about therapeutic sexual abuse. Zip. You're not interested in talking about it either. Your books don't deal with the topic. Seem a little bit taboo here? Seem like a pink elephant in the room? 30% of your clients, based on my own statistical sampling, are going to be dealing with this. Seem like something you want to deal with? Maybe, someday, sometime in the next 2,000 years, you want to actually deal with the dominant abuse dynamic of your clients that you claim to be helping? Okay, fine. Well, she says, you must not have asked them in the right way. And I said, I see. So it's the sexual abuse survivor's fault for not knowing how to engage their therapist or any other therapist in the right way. Now, have you been trained in relational skills and dealing with anger, for example? Have you been trained in dealing with anger? Because I'm angry. Now, if you can't deal with a human being's anger who has been severely sexually violated, what the fuck are you doing in a therapeutic terrain? Well, they didn't want to talk about that either, so the line went quiet. I think there's a massive load. It would not surprise me if 80% of all therapists in America have sexually abused at least one client, and they're keeping mum about it. I can understand this. Because High's teaching about asking for your 100% and blah, 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 does not actually define what sexual abuse is, nor does the cult define what sexual abuse is. So it is perfectly conceivable for a therapeutic client to think that having sex with their therapist would be therapeutic. Not knowing the data, of course, but think that and be attracted and want to do it. And having been hit on by 200 clients, it's very likely that one fits a complex within the therapist And so the therapist says, yes, when they're lonely, when they're in their own dysfunctional marriage, often highly abused themselves, etc. That's why they got into psychology. So it's very likely that just about every therapist has a skeleton in the room. So do they want to deal with it? You see, that's what they have to face to go on documentary and deal with this abuse. Now, I'm doing this for the sexual abuse survivor and for the public, not for the edification of therapists or parents or the cult or anyone else. I want what nobody gave me to be available to the next sexual abuse survivor. Now, I think that I will find therapists that will talk about this and may talk about this taboo terrain. But it is important to understand the data set, because there are whole realms of our cult that go silent into insanity. Meaning this is insane, that a therapist cannot even honor the project. These are not people that write back and say, thank you for writing and creating the only documentary out there on therapeutic abuse. We should have done this decades ago, and we're so sorry you had to be abused before this literature gets out there. But thank you. I'm nervous of doing it myself, but I'm very proud of you for doing it. It's a little encouraging, right? But no. Zip. The only response in the entire 87 emails was one woman who said, I'm out of the office and I will get back to you after I read this. And then she never did, because she realized that it was taking her into her own shadow that she didn't want to deal with. And maybe it's good for business. You see, if therapists stay silent about the sexual abuse in our cult that is rampant, I have sexually abused women for the simple reason that I did not know what sexual abuse was. You see, this is how dense we are as a cult. I thought that if I asked a woman, I would really like this, how's that for you? And she said yes, that means that whatever it is fine. It isn't. Because if she's in an abuse contract, and she's projecting dad on me, and she's 5 years old, and she knows that dad will only love her if he lets her fuck him like this and this and this and this, and she's going to be secret, and that's what she understands love is, she's going to say yes to something that is patently wrong for her development as a healthy emotional and spiritual being, which means that she is going to participate in her spiritual and emotional abuse because she doesn't see her spirit or her emotions clearly enough to know what they are. And so she doesn't know how to honor them because no one in this cult has taught her. And she's been rewarded for violating them. And me, thinking that I know something, only knew that I had an impulse to repeat my sexual abuse violation because it happened before and it was safe because abuse is familiar to those of us who have been abused as a child. It feels natural because it was done to us repeatedly by our parents. Why shouldn't we do it to other people? They called it love. So, not one of my therapists explained to me what sexual abuse was and was not, including 100 High events, the school I went to learn about healthy, loving relationships, including sex. So this is understand the system and where it's broken. Anywhere it's secret and you're not getting data, anywhere people are masking, it is broken. And it means that people don't know how to fix it. And they're confusing not knowing how to fix it with shame or it's unfixable. It's perfectly fixable. It's perfectly fixable. But not when you're hiding. Hiding is the belief that it can't be fixed. If you don't believe it can be fixed, you will hide. If you believe you are fundamentally flawed, you will hide. You see, I don't believe I'm fundamentally flawed. I believe I was confused by my therapist, my parents, by other lovers, and this culture. And that now that I understand my confusion, I will be less abusive than before. And that if I keep talking and learning, and I will be less abusive of myself and others. That's what I believe. And so I'm going to talk in the confidence and the belief in myself that there's something good in there that wants to grow, and I have to understand what it is so I can respect and honor it. That's what I believe, and that's why I'm here. That's not what people believe who are committed to secrecy, and they are not your friend. Because what they're keeping secret is failing, but it can't be fixed because it can't be examined. And it can't be examined because the belief is it can't be fixed. That is a lie. So you've got to know the data, and you got to explore. And it is a bizarre joke, it's a bizarre circus out there as to who will and will not talk about what and on and off the record. I just talked to HUD about a homeless woman who's been going through the ringers in being set up to fail by the local housing system. And HUD, which is supposed to be overseeing it, is aware of the dynamics. So I'm talking with her contact person to be interviewed. She doesn't want to be interviewed because to be visible in a flawed system challenges the flaws in the system. And HUD is not interested in seeing this woman housed. They're interested in maintaining the status quo that gives them billions of dollars of public money to make the problem worse in many situations. So we've immediately got to go through public relations, who immediately brings up all kinds of red herrings, for confidential. No, I have the woman here. She would like to talk. No, for her confidentiality, we can't discuss this. You mean for your secrecy, you will not tell the truth. She's here. I'm talking with her. Do you want to meet in a threesome? Is that respecting her rights? She asked me to call you, and you're telling you can't talk about it. You see, that's the bullshit. That's how sick, dysfunctional systems at every level of our cult get held in place. So you got to know the data. And part of the data, for example, one of the things I learned in this data set is I'm at the 4-year mark before kind of making a large emergence around the sexual abuse at high. One of the things that I learned is it takes in the US an average of 11 years for a sexual abuse survivor to come forth. So if someone's going to accuse a priest of raping them when they're 8 years old, they're going to be at an average of 19 before they're doing that. If a woman's been beaten and raped and stuff, it's going to take her an average of 11 years. So this is an important data set to be aware of, because if you know what data set you're in, for example, young boys who have been fucked by older men as juniors disproportionately represent the juveniles put to death in this country. So you can tell a narrative. Fucking young boys by older men really fucks up the psyche. It fucks up the psyche so bad that they become some of the most violent offenders in the entire cult. In the stupidity of our cult, we then put these juveniles to death for the crime of being fucked by older men. And so large percentages of the juvenile boys, that's the majority, who are put to death in this country have been sexually abused by older men. Tells you it's a pretty big deal. Peter Sandhill is an older man. Psychedelics regresses the psyche. So I'm dealing with emotional and sexual abuse by a therapist in a regressed state, colluded and covered up by the family system, by the cult of the community. Well, it tells me that I'm ahead of schedule by 7 years to deal with this at 4 years. Good. And it tells me this is severe. Good. It's good to know that. You need to know the data set that you're dealing with. How many people who have been sexually abused make it through traumatic shutdown and into post-traumatic growth, for example? And what are the cultural variables in those that do and those that do not? Don't look at the individual and tell them to be positive. Look at the group pattern dynamic and understand what does it take statistically for an individual to have a community that is healthy enough that they can go into post-traumatic growth. You need to know that so you can know what can beat the odds. For example, if you have one safe confidant to talk about and that's the pivot point, you need to know that should be your number one goal, to find one safe confidant. Well, I have that with my wife. And so you need to know that to beat the odds. Now, it's critical in this entire process to understand trauma, its symptoms, its repair, the brain mechanisms, etc., because that's what's going on when I explode in tears at 70 miles an hour driving home from work in a heavy pickup that could do a lot of damage if it gets out of control. That's what's going on. The only trouble is, when this happened, I had never understood what trauma was. I had done $150,000 of therapy. I'd spent time with more than 40 healers, therapists, and various practitioners, and no one had ever told me what trauma was. No one gave me a questionnaire to identify that I had it. I thought trauma was for Iraqi veterans and Vietnam veterans. I haven't had grenades going off in my face and shot down a buddy and dropped napalm on women and children running through rice fields. No. I was just beaten and humiliated. I was just shut down emotionally. I was just lied to repeatedly and this and this and this. I didn't think that was trauma. I didn't think it could be a cumulative amount of lots of little things. So you got to understand what trauma is, and there's no better way than reading The Body Keeps the Score, preferably on Audible if it's too overwhelming to read in person. You got to understand trauma so that you can say, that's what's going on. I'm having a traumatic reaction. I'm in trauma, and here's what I have to do before it turns into PTSD. Peter Levine, a traumatic writer, had an auto accident. And because he understood trauma, because he understood the correlation between heartbeat and PTSD, he calmed his heartbeat down so that the trauma did not become PTSD, because he knew the terrain. Well, we're a traumatically illiterate culture that doesn't know how to do this, so we turn people into PTSD victims right and left. While being helpful, we abuse so many of our people in accidents and give them PTSD by the time they're physically helped. So we have to understand trauma. And we also have to understand with trauma the segment of post-traumatic growth, because what trauma is basically saying is that your life as you knew it is through. You can no longer go back to the person you were before. You can't go back there. You are going to be a new person. You are either going to be a shriveled shell who can't face reality, and your life is effectively over and in way more pain than pleasure, and you are going to be in a living hell until you die, and you're going to hurt and affect a lot of people along the way who don't know how to deal with trauma in a trauma-illiterate culture, and who you don't know how to deal with because you don't understand trauma. And it's going to be absolute hell for all involved, the penalty of ignorance and willful cruelty in a cult that dishonors the feminine. That's one way. But there is also the chance that you can grow in ways that will not take you back to who you were. You will become something new, something different, that you would never have become otherwise. And there's a way of looking at this that something in you, some aspect of your soul and spirit, said that this is important enough to jolt you out of the past trajectory into a new vector, a new path that is different in a dynamically expansive way than the trajectory before. This is a possibility in our culture, not a probability, a possibility. We need to understand the variables between the shriveled shell who can't face reality, I've been there many times, and the one who is growing into something more. And if we want more of our veterans to stop killing themselves or abusing their children, if we want more of our veterans to stop violating their wives and girlfriends, if we want more of our men who have been shut down and shamed to a point of PTSD to become human again, if we want more of the sociopathic women who cut off from their feminine side to win in a masculine world, and if we want our children to have empathy, if we want world leaders that won't lie to stay in power, but instead will care about people, we need to learn the technology of pivoting from a sociopathic shell or a compensating reptilian brain that has determined to go from being helpless to dominating. How to create and co-create environments conducive to post-traumatic growth. And I fiddled with this a great deal. I found a masseuse and taught her how to do energy work, or rather to refine the energy work that I felt coming from her hands. And immediately she learned that, well, I did 5 hours a day on average of energy healing for weeks and weeks and weeks as I lay on the floor in Manila in my hotel. I got myself to Asia, a more feminine honoring culture. Tears are met with tears in a feminine culture because there's empathy. My tears are your tears. Strangers took better care of me than neighbors or friends who have known me for decades because of a feminine culture. And I understood that because I had traveled the entire world looking for a feminine culture to heal the wounded feminine in me from an abusive childhood that felt so sad in the cult that we call our own here. So I knew where to get myself. And then within that terrain, I had to find, because I had PTSD, so traffic horns and cars exploded in my ears and threw me into rages. So I had to get away from cars and near the ocean and sit for hours a day in the waves. And I designed a community, 10xliving.org, that I thought would help veterans, that would help people like me, and where to do it and how to do it in a way that would cost a fraction of the money spent in the U.S., how to do it on an island like Palawan in the Philippines as opposed to in the U.S. where they charge you $5,000 just to walk in and talk to the emergency room nurses. You know, it's a trauma in and of itself to get health care in the United States. A financial trauma, a psychological trauma, a physiological trauma, when you learn that protocols that have nothing to do with your personal well-being are going to determine your care more than what you personally need, and that your input is minimal and your needs are irrelevant to the protocol. That's called sociopathic. When you go for healing and find yourself in a sociopathic system, It's very sad. It's very sad. So this is the terrain that can transform a culture, can transform a community, can transform an individual. And part of the paradigm shift I want to give is the shift from treating our abuse survivors as the unwelcome, shameful reminders of our cultural incompetence, the reminders of the futility of trying, that we want to banish and punish for reminding us of our inadequacy as individuals, as communities, and as cult, into the teachers, that through learning how to heal as an individual, we can learn to heal our families, our communities, as the people who carry the knowledge, our homeless, our sexual abuse survivors, our young pregnant women, who carry the knowledge of what is faulty in our culture that we are creating by causing or allowing, that we are participating in with our cultural illiteracy, our traumatic illiteracy, our abuse illiteracy, our emotional illiteracy, our social illiteracy, because we do not know in America how to form long and enduring friendships with mastery. And as a result, the amount of best, top, safe friends has gone down by half, and it's worse for men than it is for women in just the last couple of decades. Down from a scarce few good friends, down to none or one best friend. That's the kind of cult we are creating with our silence and with an entire group of people telling me with their words, with their silence, and with their actions, this is not our problem. I do not want to deal with this. I would like you to go away, die if necessary. But please don't burden us with the truth. We're too sleepy and interested in being positive. As we seek the drug of sex over the truth of soul and substance, as we seek the upper of cheerfulness and little morning dances over discussions about trauma and sexual abuse, we do not want to deal with the truth. It's too depressing, and there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So let's cover our eyes and turn the other way. It's just life. It's sad. And it's too tired. It's just too tiring to try and fight the whole circle of secrecy and sleep. But the good news is it only takes one person to go on this journey, with or without support, with or without blessing. The entire team can turn away. Your friends can refuse to talk about the issue. The 2 Americans I reached out to in this time both had no interest in helping with the nonprofit or anything like this. Both took months just to watch a few videos. Neither asked how they could help. They're dissociated. They're disconnected from themselves, so they're disconnected from me. They're disconnected from their inner feminine, so they don't understand mine. That's the disease of chauvinism in men and women in our culture. So it doesn't take a whole bunch of people. It just takes one. Now, we do need help in this traumatic terrain, and that's the last and very important part in this map of spirituality. It takes enormous amount of help to lift this shame, to lift this grief, to lift this depression, this bitterness, incredible exhaustion and terror. The help is all around. The help is all around. And the gift in the systemic betrayal of human beings is the opportunity to feel, to reconnect with the life energy in the earth, with the life energy of soul and spirit, with God, Goddess, all that is, with a world of unseen friends that are here, that celebrate every moment of truth. Not your parents. They get upset when you tell the truth. Not your therapist. They don't want to look at this truth and this truth and this truth. But the unseen friends that have no agenda other than your spiritual development, your emotional growth. It is in these resources that I have gotten out of bed, dove into the pain again, faced the dragon yet again, felt my mind shutting down, wondered if it would all come in, and been celebrated. Celebrated for the hero's journey, of which we are all a part. Can we break away from the monotonous cycle of sleep, go off and take the road less traveled, find something precious in the sacred unknown, that feminine terrain that is 99.9% of all reality, the unknown, the mystery, and find something to come back, because that is the key to transformation, to development, to post-traumatic growth. It's not in the malaise and lethargy of an uneducated public. It's not in the hemming awkwardness of a friend that'd rather end the conversation than ask those dreaded questions. How can I help? What do you need? The dreaded question because the answers are so easy, but so frightening. If you don't want to go, if you don't want to know, if you don't want to see, if you don't want to respect, if you don't want to honor who we are. So easy and so dreaded in our fear of the unknown. And you can measure the extent of trauma in any cult, in any culture, by the terror of the unknown and the degree to which the cult will become irrationally self-destructive to avoid the unknown. The Human Awareness Institute facilitators, team members, and board members have become irrationally self-destructive in order to avoid the easy path into growth, into beauty, truth, goodness, and evolution by following mission into the unknown, by sacrificing the old system, the dragon, by sacrificing the chauvinism of the status quo, to let a veil of mystery open up. What happens when we love enough to give up our dogmas and our control? To step into beauty, into joy. What happens when the Human Awareness Institute as legal entity is less important than the safety of the wounded child, than the innocence of the feminine in our midst that has just been shut down, cauterized, and stomped on by the unconsciousness of fear and chauvinism? What happens when we step through that door into a new world that is currently unknown, that is veiled, because it is in her domain, the domain of mystery, the feminine soul? That is the question. And how far will we plunge into hell to avoid her light and her grace? That is the question. And the answer is up to each one of us. Thank you. There's a short addendum to the map and the journey through a healing terrain post-trauma, I want to mention that shame and forgiveness are two important personal landmarks. Now, I've found that the shame is too numbing, is too overwhelming to deal with directly when the shame of a culture, the shame of a parental system, the shame of a family system, the shame of a therapeutic system, the shame of a cultural system is all resting on my chest. Because one of the expressions of shame is asking someone to do what they cannot do, and then dissociating from them if they cannot do it. You know, when a parent asks a 6-year-old to satisfy her husband sexually, she cannot do it. When a culture asks a homeless individual to house themselves with a $600,000 house while they have PTSD and they can't do it. It is shameful to ask this of an individual, to ask a therapeutic client, regressed, confused by the recategorization of abuse as love by both parents and therapist in new terrain, and dealing with a lifetime of pain. They can't do it without help. And they certainly can't do it when the help they seek is unhelpful. So these are shameful, meaning they're taking a weight that's too heavy to carry, and they're placing it on the back of someone who cannot carry it, and then dissociating from that individual. Oh, well, they'll get over it. Oh, well, they're a loser. You know, it's not my problem. We did our part. We built the $600,000 houses and made sure that none of that, nothing less was available. And we did our part to pass laws that say that they can't sleep in the national parks, and they can't sleep in their cars, and they can't sleep in a tent, and they can't even camp on their own land. We did our part, and now it's up to them. This is a shaming, and it's too heavy. And so a lot of my first work was moving overwhelming grief, pain, anger, and loneliness that was so overwhelming it was collapsing my awareness, my ability to speak, and giving it back to my therapist, giving it back to my culture, giving it back to my family system, giving it back to the paradigms of our age that create these overwhelmingly shameful dynamics. Because ultimately what shame is about is saying, you don't belong. This is the line, and we're going to create the line. That's the first step of shame. The second step of shame is setting a statistically significant number of people up to cross over that line. If you are a bicycle wheel, for example, and you want to move forward, and you decide that 3 spokes on the wheel do not belong, that this is taboo terrain that is shameful,
But we as a culture want to move forward. We want to evolve. Well, in the course of moving forward and evolving, those three spokes in the psyche, those three personas in the psyche, those three spokes in the wheel, are going to make contact with the ground. Now, in a culturally illiterate, in a psychologically illiterate culture, these spokes will then be punished for emerging. Every time these three spokes hit the ground, there'll be an uproar. People will try and cover it up. No, never happened. Don't tell anyone you're one of those spokes. No. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. They turned on their own. We told them not to turn. But the entire momentum of the wheel in an interconnected ecology ensures that as the culture moves forward, meaning if the culture grinds out people in pain and then grinds out a protocol of pain management that is mostly denial and shame, you will have addicts. That's what the cult creates, is addicts. Now, those addicts are a part of the ecology. They are absolutely necessary for this cult to exist as it is currently designed. Meaning this cult produces pain. This cult produces ineffective pain healing, which means that the path of least resistance, which is what energy always takes, is towards addiction. It's not the path of least resistance overall, just within the framework of the cult. The path of least resistance is to say, anyone in pain? How much pain, 1 to 10? Oh, I see. Pain goes up significantly as we send our kids off to pathological education. Pain goes up when parents drive off to work 10 hours away from their infant. To pain. Let's change the cult. Let's soften that pain point a little bit. Let's include more feminine energy in education. So then, of course, pain goes down. And if you teach pain management technology in your cult, then people pick the fun way of managing pain, which is to say, hello, I'm in pain. And a circle of 3 people automatically, who has been well trained within the cult, comes around and says, what is the pain? Mental, emotional, physical, financial? What are the causative factors? How are we all responsible for the pain, and how are you responsible for the pain? Let's look at the middle convergence point. Let's see what we can change and what you can change. Let's reassess the data produced by the new change. And if the statistical amount of pain per individual goes down 10% as the result of the new protocol, we have just eliminated 10% pain from our statistics in our cult. We are now less painful. And lo and behold, when you are in less pain, you don't actually want to drink foul-tasting alcohol to a point of oblivion and wake up with a hangover. You don't actually want to take amphetamines to rush around and avoid your feelings, knowing that they're destroying your teeth and all that. You don't actually want to binge watch to escape your reality, Netflix or anything else. You want to engage with a healthy reality. So this is an intelligent cult, but we are not an intelligent cult. And so we produce pain, which means we produce people who pain manage. And because the protocol of pain management is so crude and unconscious, we then render loyal people trying to do what they're told, go to work even though they're in massive amounts of pain, carry on with the marriage even though they're in massive amounts of pain, be a good father when they're in absolute misery. We produce people who loyally try to follow the cult doctrine, to stay inside the line. They even lie. They pretend, no, I'm not in pain. I'm not in pain. No, I'm not an addict. I'll secretly bear the curse of the cult. I'll secretly protect the cult from its own stupidity, because we wouldn't want the cult to feel bad. The fact that I'm going to die an alcoholic with a shorter life in lies and loneliness, fine, I'll do it. I'll protect the cult so that the cult will like me, so that I can meet my needs for survival, security, love, and belonging. In other words, when you create a cult that is poorly designed, these spokes in the wheel that are taboo, that are shameful, will hit the ground. And in an involved cult, this will trigger transformation. In a sociopathic cult, this will trigger shame, blame, and isolation, where it's very clear if you talk about these things, you're not welcome. So it's very important as an individual to give these shames back where they belong. It is shameful to draw lines in the sand that say you don't belong if you cross these lines, but we are going to make crossing these lines the easiest way to manage the massive amounts of pain we are going to dump on you and not deal with. That is shameful. And it's more than an individual can bear, at least until they're conscious of what's going on. Once you're conscious of what's going on and you can fly around the world and get passport extensions and this and that and the other and spend time in other cults that don't shame their citizens for having feelings, for example, you have some resources. But if you don't even understand what's going on because your cult has brainwashed you into saying it's the best in the world and don't think, don't look at anything, just this is the American way, whatever it is. How can you examine something that has been self-referentially defined as good just because it's good, because we said it's good? That's called brainwashing. It's not called thinking or intelligence. And so giving back the shame to the therapeutic system, to the cult system, to individuals who have played the role of steering me in the wrong direction and then blaming me for where that direction ends up. Not helping when that ends up in misery and depression, etc., is a very important step. Lifting the shame off of oneself. So this is how shame gets internalized. So first the cult does this, and you're 2 years old, you're 5 years old, you're 10 years old, and it's always your fault. Your parents glare at you, and they don't say, we're idiots, we really apologize for our stupidity. We don't even know what an idiot is. That's the kind of idiots we are. We couldn't even define whether we're an idiot or not, because we're an idiot. And you can't ask idiots to define what is and isn't intelligent in any intelligent way. You're not going to hear from your parents that intelligence is the efficiency of transforming energy, time, money, natural resources, emotion, into human well-being, and that you can measure objective intelligence by how efficiently this person is doing that versus this person. You're not going to learn that. And you're certainly not going to have people grade and say, gee, I am not at all intelligent. I just spent lots of money to be more miserable, something that's very common in our culture. I just cut down an entire forest to print leaflets that are going to add guilt to the cult. So now we have no oxygen, we have flooded watersheds, and everyone is more guilty. And I have lots of money. Aren't I intelligent? Now, that's not creating well-being with energy. It is taking vast amounts of energy to increase suffering. And the fact that money is a symbol is lost on us. It is bits of paper. You can't eat it and feel good, etc. It's what you do with it. Well, then I'm going to go out and gamble and thus to numb my pain and da-da-da. Aren't I smart? Oh, bravo, says the culture. An industrious businessman has been born. So you can't expect a cult to examine itself, which puts this burden on the individual. Well, how does an individual learn to do that in a cult that does the opposite? And that says, if you're not normal, we don't want anything to do with you. So this is a first journey of basically taking all the internalized criticism. Why can't I fit in? Why do I feel worse every time I do what these people say? Why do they give me more money for doing the thing that makes me feel terrible? Why did my therapist hurt me so much and call it love? What's all this? It's all my fault. If I would just keep dying, everyone would be happy as long as I don't talk about the reasons and stuff. And so this is a very important thing to first begin by giving the shame back. If there's anyone to blame with the creativity and innocent potential of an infant, if there's anyone to blame or shame when you take the creativity and the innocence and the neutral resource of an infant, a psyche, a soul, a body, a mind that can learn any language, a mind that can learn any culture, a mind that's going to copy whatever the dominant things are around. This is incredible. It's an incredible neutral resource. And different cults are going to turn that resource into a set of statistics, meaning you grow up in this cult with that resource, and 7% are going to have substance, or it's about 18% are going to have substance addictions, and so and so and so. You grow up over here, and no one will have a substance addiction. You grow over here, you're going to feel shame and miserable, and you grow up over here, and you're going to smile a lot more. And it's like, these are neutral resources being applied in different templates of design. And certainly one can be proud individually that one is on the high side of the statistical continuum for your cult. You can say our cult produces 40% of our cult is obese. So I beat that statistic. I'm not obese. Good for me. That's the individual. The cult is producing this, and then the individual is stepping to the one side of it. But it's very difficult to step through the side of all of the different hurdles created by one's cult. So that's the process of giving back. Now, once the shame is given back to a point where it can be turned into anger, fuck you for sending me to a school that doesn't teach anything about feelings. I've had feelings since the day I was born, and most of them are miserable. Fuck you for ignoring that fact. Fuck you. You see, now you got some dynamism. Anger is more useful than shame. And you can analyze now with anger. It's like, yeah, that's dumb. That's ridiculous. That's unkind. Why'd you do that instead of that? That's so much easier. It'd be so much nicer to sit around and talk about feelings in class in high school rather than feel miserable and embarrassed and lonely and isolated. It'd be so much nicer. Why the fuck can't we do that? Maybe kids would fight to go to school if the school was actually useful. And so now we're moving into anger. Now the anger can transition into change. Okay, you bozos aren't going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit around in a circle and deal with my own feelings, and fuck you if you don't know the difference of, So this is now cutting through the frozenness of the frozenness that can come up in fight, flight, and freeze. So we've got transition there. But there's still an extraordinary amount of pain. Anger, shame, that's gone from being blamed inside is now going back where it belongs, outside. Now the wound is going back to its external cultural expression. Feelings are able to come in. Anger is a good one for moving when you're in pain because you can't feel joy when you're in enormous amounts of pain, but you can feel anger, and anger can motivate. And I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start a nonprofit. I'm gonna make these videos. I'm gonna talk about this. I'm gonna break these taboos. I'm gonna draw light on these things. And even bringing the anger, the blame, etc., outward is healthier than bringing it inward. If you are frozen in an overwhelming way, if you've been given an overwhelming load, and you think of it like a bicycle wheel, imagine if 200 pounds of weight was placed in one spoke of a bicycle wheel, and all the other spokes of the bicycle wheel were weightless. it's not good for the driver. It's not good for the wheel turning. Evolution occurs when we become conscious. And consciousness occurs as we move through the full circle of the cult. So the cult has a circle. For example, ours is, oh, I can't wait. I don't want to get out of bed. Oh, let's go. Okay, take some coffee to pep me up. Okay, I can get out of bed. Okay. Got to rush through traffic and not eat very much and eat well for my body. I got to scramble and addictively run to work. Got to stuff all my feelings. They're unprofessional. Then I got to do the reverse coming home. Oh, and I need a drink after that. My goodness. This is so miserable. Let me watch TV and numb that out. I'm exhausted, but I'm so lonely. Let me go to sleep with the TV on. And let's do it again. So that's our cult wheel. And, for that to turn, it needs millions and millions of sacrificial individuals to believe what they are told, that this is a productive life and that they should participate willingly and not make a fuss and do whatever they have to do in private to make that wheel go along. But if all the weight is on one point in that, the wheel can't turn. It's stuck. So if you distribute the weight of shame equally around the wheel, you're a dysfunctional teacher. You could have done this and this and this. You're a dysfunctional therapist. You could have done this, this, and this. I'm a dysfunctional thinker who could have said, this is all bullshit. I'm not doing this. My parents are dysfunctional parents who did this and this and this. My government is full of shit who did this, this, and this. Okay. So now we've got a wheel that, however dysfunctional it is, it's equally weighted, which will turn easier. And you can see more clearly. When things won't turn, they're stuck. You can't move. You got to have the wheel turning for you to examine it, basically. And so you want to weight the blessings, the pains, the blames to everyone who's causing and allowing that wheel to exist. So now we've also restored integration with this process. See, because when I'm so unspeakable and so hideous because I had the audacity to break the rule and do this and talk about the truth as hideous, when I'm the one that is the problem, then there's no integration. Everyone wants to get rid of the problem by getting rid of this, and so nobody knows what's going on, and you've got dissociation and dysfunction. It's like pulling the wheel apart to avoid anything coming to light. It's absurd. But now that we've equally weighted the wheel and we understand that, and we're now a part of the wheel, we're a part of the problem, we're a part of the solution. It's not our problem, it's our problem. And we need to figure out how to relate to that. Now you've got another aspect, which is healing. We're now a part of things. And then secondly, we can now forgive ourselves for our part. In the metaphysical traditions, they're quick. It's always the child who chooses the parent. They don't talk about the parent choosing the child. You'll hear in metaphysical circles, you chose your parents. It means you're responsible, right? You at 2 years old, you were beaten. Well, what can you expect? You chose those parents. So wait a minute, I didn't choose these parents. I don't recall choosing these parents. Never in a million years would I choose these parents. Who the fuck are you? And so there's but the point is, it's focused as usual in a chauvinistic culture. The child will be blamed for the parent's mistake. The citizen will be blamed for the government's mistake. The woman will be blamed for the husband's mistake. The employee will be blamed by the boss's mistake. Whoever is in the more masculine of the role, of the position, will blame the more feminine, because that's what chauvinism is all about. And so, no, it's not the parent's fault. It's the 2-year-old's fault for picking the parents. I was talking with my mother, and she said, we choose our parents. And I said, that's interesting, because, that's what you used to say about marriage as well. You would tell us, whenever Dad did anything wrong, that your father, You see, you didn't choose your children, did you? And you didn't choose your husband, did you? And your husband didn't choose you, did he? And he didn't choose his children or to have children. No, no, no. You're all the adults who have zero responsibility for anything. You don't choose whether to wear a condom or not. You don't choose how many. You don't choose to investigate your family system, etc. You don't choose the soul of the children. You don't even choose your own spouse. It's your father, your mother, this, that, and the other. And it's so absurd. It's like, go fuck yourself. Why did you choose children who hate you so much? Fucked up mom, Deal with your choices. Yeah, okay, fine. I guess it makes sense. Children choose their parents, but their parents are just helpless victims. Oh, my goodness. Fine. I guess I must have chosen you for a reason. I don't know what, So neutralize this unidirectional toxicity, because toxicity is a concentration of energy. We need lead as a trace mineral. We need borite for a trace mineral. We need salt in our diet. The problem is when it gets toxic by concentrating too much of anything at one point in the ecology. You mine salt, refine it, and dump it in a freshwater pond, and it kills all the thing. You mine salt and dole it out in little pieces in people's diet, and they have enough sodium. You see, so it's about toxicity. So this is the detoxing process, which is not about getting rid of shame. It's about externalizing it and sharing it. Someone says, you don't love me, you didn't love me. You can look at that and you can say, that may or may not be true. What do you mean by that? Okay, all right. Okay, so we've now established that in this area, by your definition, I'm not being very loving. Now, are you loving enough to be interested in the areas that you're not loving me? My goodness. You matter as well? It's not all about me? Oh, my goodness. And it makes it really easy, of course, when you're being completely dominated and punished by a partner but not loving them enough. If you make that distinction. Because what mature love is, just to be clear, because we don't articulate it in our culture, what mature love is wanting the very best for the other and letting that intention for the very best part of the other to have the very best odds of creating what is best for the best of the other. In other words, if someone wants to be honest and have a life of dignity and prayer, and you're a crook who lies and gambles and blah, 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 and you love your partner to help the best part of them be in the best situation, and they want to go live in a community that's about spiritual growth or something. If you love them as a mature adult, your love transcends your lust, your own selfish obsession about control and addiction. And so you say, no, of course this hurts me. Of course this ruins my little addiction game and stuff. But because I actually care about the best part of you, I'm going to support this. And I'll find another addict to deal with. There's plenty around. You're ready to break free of my hell and stuff. So go off and be your best, and I'm happy for you. That's mature adult love. And when you say, so when I tell a woman, I'm very unhappy about this and this and this and this, and my needs aren't being met here and here and here, and I think I can meet them much better over here and doing these things, but you don't want me to do them, and so I'm holding back, and I'm feeling starved. I'm feeling starved in my effort to be kind to you. Well, a mature woman says, I'm so sorry. And of course, I want the best for you. And you're right. I can't do that with my given choices and values and priorities. You're right. I can't talk about these things. I'm not interested in them. And that's really important to you. And I won't take the time off work or anything like that, or shift paths so that we can explore this. And no, I don't want to go to the places that make you happy. And so you're absolutely right. And thank you so much for telling me, because I care about you. I want you to be the best you. And so let's have a great ending. Let's have a great ending so that you can be the best you, and I'll try and find someone that can help me maintain the course that I'm committed to, more than I'm committed to being the person that brings out the best in you. And that's a mature and unusual woman. It's a mature and an unusual man, I'm sure. I just don't date that way. So when a woman comes up to me and is saying, "But I need you, I want you," no, don't go over there. I don't want you spending time with that woman. I don't want you doing this. I don't. Yeah, if you loved me, if you really loved me, you would be miserable and do this, and you wouldn't say anything about it. And it's like, you don't know what love is, do you? You're not in love with me. I'm just a little bit of a bauble who's oiled your wheels here and there and given you some little stuff, and so you don't want it to go away. And if I get ground into the dirt while I'm enabling what you enjoy, so be it, because you do not understand the meaning of mature love. So it makes it very easy to let go of something wasn't love in the beginning. It's martyrhood and self-absorption pairing together with no real awareness. And it's not even loving to her. Because how's she going to learn what real love is, which is caring about something beautiful, good, and true in the other, enough to make sacrifices of lust and addiction and greed and control, so that beauty can grow in its own way. And if she's just in manic, dysfunctional addiction of me with no interest in me becoming more, well, she's missing out. And so I explain this to her. And of course, the juvenile addict starts arguing with me before I even begin finishing the sentence, because they don't want to see, and they don't want to love, and they don't want to give up the addiction. They want what they want because they want it, and that's enough for them. And so I'm a drug for them then, as long as I enable their little habit. So that's a good distinction. The next part is forgiveness, because I went along, If there is such a thing of choosing my parents or my culture at a point of time, it's a fucking painful decision, and I'm sorry to the best parts of me for drawing out so much pain and misery as a result of being here. Forgiveness for being here. Forgiveness for not being able, at 5-year-old, etc., to help a set of dysfunctional parents do whatever they're doing. Forgiveness for shutting down my feelings to avoid the humiliation, etc., because even though it may have been the best choice that a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old stumbled into unconsciously, as, oh my gosh, I feel a little better if I'm doing that, and I need to feel a little better. I'm in so much pain in a cult that is making it worse every year. I didn't know. I participated in that. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I played a part in that. And I'm sorry I couldn't fight for my 5-year-old when I was 5 years old. And I'm sorry I couldn't fight for my siblings. And I'm sorry this, and I'm sorry that. And I'm sorry that I became this way. And I'm sorry that twisted into this way. Remorse sadness for all of the deviations that I participated in by causing them, by allowing them, by being too frightened to face them in our cult. All of those deviations from what a much easier, healthy cult might look like, a much easier and a much healthier cult might look like, individually, in small groups, and otherwise. I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry. And this forgiveness is also, I think, the first step in being able to forgive other people. I'm doing a lot of shame work and a lot of forgiveness work to be able to feel that I can accept my role in creating, and through allowing, in so many cases, through allowing so much pain. And I think that particularly on the other side of being able to stop some of the pain-allowing dynamic, one, and two, understanding how I find myself at this point, that in time, that forgiveness and allowing can move outside and say, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my mother was faced with a similarly difficult choice, that my father was faced with a similarly difficult choice, that my siblings were faced with these difficult choices, and they also allowed and created all these things that hurt me and that hurt themselves to belong. And we're human. We make mistakes. We're not perfect. And this is the ultimate healing of shame, to understand we're human, we make mistakes, we're not perfect. We can grow and we can learn, we can make amends. And that there is a world of abundance. And there is a world where it's much easier to create beauty, truth, and goodness than it is to create all of this suffering. But the cult suppresses awareness of its own analysis. The cult will never, in any member of the cult, no member of government, anything like that, sits down and examines the dysfunction of government, the dysfunction of education, the dysfunction of the legal system, the dysfunction of capitalism. None of this is examined, because the very nature of a cult is to unconsciously perpetuate a status quo that has some history of allowing survival in the past. You know, we did this in the past, we survived, so it's sacred. It's sacred and cannot be analyzed and refined. And this is where you have, the bizarreness of, for example, farmers being allowed to burn their crops and producing more smoke than all the cars in the country. That's fine, because that's what farmers do. But you've got to go smog test your car for $60 and run gasoline into the air and this and that and the other, and drive and take time off work and do this, etc., because you might be producing this tiny little thing, and that's not sacred in the cult. So everyone's spending gasoline, time, and money, driving to smog stations and running their engines and spewing smoke into the earth, with billions of dollars a year in smog test fees, while that which is tradition, that which is the cult, go ahead, light up the whole wheat field and burn it all up. And there's no doubt about it that it is the most smoke-filled, poorly burning, inefficient system imaginable. But who cares? That's the cult. And so you have this dynamic. Thanks for watching.